Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Hayya ala salah. Hayya ala salah. Hayya ala falah. Hayya ala falah. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. La ilaha illallah.
Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Amma ba'du, fa'uzu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Qala Allah ta'ala fil Qur'anil Hakim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Ya bunayya innaha in taku miskala habbatin min khardalin fatakun fi sakratin aw fis samawati aw fil ardi ya'ti biha Allah. Inna Allaha latifun khabir. Sadaqallahul azim. In the last khutbah, I had reached verse 15 of chapter 31 of the Holy Quran in the section on Luqman's preaching to his son. And this is verse 16, which I've just read out, which translates as follows: My son, even if it is the weight of a grain of mustard seed, and even though it were in a rock or in the heavens or in the earth, Allah will bring it forth. Surely Allah is the knower of subtleties and He is aware. And the title I've given to this khutbah, which is the second one on Luqman's advice to his son, is Rising from Insignificance to Greatness. Although I might not be able to cover that point fully, but I'll try. Now, in this verse 16, the law of God is taught to human beings that even the most insignificant and smallest thing can lead to a great and powerful effect and great consequences. And if we apply to human deeds, what it means is that every action, no matter how significant, everything we do, no matter how insignificant, will produce a result. So we must not think that a small good deed we do is worthless and will hardly benefit anyone and will not be counted by Allah. Similarly, we must not think that a small bad deed by us doesn't matter, because it caused very little harm to anyone. Now, here it says, even though if it were in a rock, this weight of a grain of mustard seed. And what is meant by even if it was in a rock are those small actions of ours which remain hidden. They remain hidden because apparently they don't bear any fruit, they come to a dead end, and they can't break through anywhere. So they're like the weight of a grain of mustard seed inside a rock. And then it goes on to say, even if that grain of a mustard seed was in the heavens. And by saying in the heavens, what is meant are those actions which we do for good or heavenly purposes. And then it goes on to say, or in the earth. This grain of mustard seed, even if it was in a rock or in the heavens or in the earth. And by in the earth, what is meant are those actions which we did in our worldly lives for worldly purposes, not necessarily bad. So the principle which is taught here is that any action, however small and insignificant it may appear, whether we do it for spiritual reasons or material purposes, it will not just disappear somewhere and make no difference. Because for a start, any such action, however small, will contribute in shaping our character. And then our action may be small, but it may help and encourage others to go much further in the same line. And so our action then becomes the basis for great achievements by others. Now you will have seen how when someone becomes great and famous, maybe a great scientist, in case of a great scientist, he goes back to his school, his primary school, for example, and he picks out a teacher and he thanks that teacher and says, it was because of you that I reached this position. The teacher gave him that start. It was that small action by the teacher. And look how God brought forth that action in the form of that great scientist. So Allah brings into open view small actions. Now there are other scientific senses in which you can see this principle working of where the weight of a grain of mustard seed can lead to. Take, first of all, the COVID-19 virus. According to a website, the size of that virus is 1/600th of a grain of salt. You take a grain of salt, divide it into 600 equal parts, and one of those is the size of the COVID-19 virus. And the same website also goes on to say, from COVID-19 to air pollution, recently some of the world's biggest threats have been microscopic in size. Now, some people have suggested that this COVID-19 virus originated in a scientific laboratory in China and leaked out from there, where it was being studied. Now, in that case, applying this verse, you could say that this virus was in a rock. In other words, it was in a secure place from which you would not expect it to escape. But it got out of there, and going out from there, it caused devastation, as we know. And you could say that that virus also went to heaven and came back to earth, because much of it was spread by passengers traveling by air who brought it from one country to another. So this grain of a mustard seed or even smaller was in a rock, it went up to heaven in a plane and it came down to earth and spread there. And another example, scientific example, which is a much better one, is that of nuclear and atomic bombs. It was discovered in the 1930s that if an atom of a certain mineral, whose name is uranium, you might have heard of, one atom, if it's split by being hit by a particle, which is called a neutron, then it produces a large amount of heat, and also it releases more neutrons, the same thing which hit it. And the neutrons from that atom then can go and hit simultaneously 2 or 3 more atoms and split those, and so on, releasing more heat and more neutrons. And this is the process, obviously I've described in a simplistic way. This is what's called a nuclear chain reaction. And that will continue and generate an enormous amount of heat very quickly, as it happens in an atomic bomb. Now, this uranium, this material, is found largely in rocks on Earth. But more than 99% of it, which is called U-238, is not the type which has this property that I've described, that the atom splits and produces energy and more neutrons. It does not. 99% of it doesn't, more than 99%. Only a tiny part of that uranium, which is called U-235, is the type which produces a chain reaction. So from that little seed in a rock, the laws of God have enabled man to bring it forth either as an atomic bomb explosion or as electricity generated in a nuclear power station. Now, you can also say that this seed of uranium, after being in a rock, you could say it goes up to heaven and comes down to earth, because an atomic bomb is dropped from thousands of feet above the earth. So the seed then has gone up there, thousands of feet above the earth. And on the earth itself, you can use that same atom in a nuclear power station for generating enormous amounts of electricity. Now, after my last khutbah on the subject of Luqman's preaching to his son, a member of our Jamaat in Holland, Reza Ghafoor Khan, sent me an article explaining the same verses by the late and great Mr. Nasir Ahmed Faruqi, written in 1977 and published in our magazine, The Light of Lahore. And in that, Mr. Faruqi has made some other enlightening observations. He writes that this Luqman, I mentioned last time that he was an African and a black man, that's all I said. He writes that he was a black slave in Africa and was illiterate. And so he says about this verse, which I've been explaining, that by the tiny seed in the rock is meant an insignificant person like that black slave. He's crushed by poverty and hardship, crushed in that rock. And this heaven and earth, being the seed being in heaven and earth, means he's blown about here and there by adversity and deprivation, like a homeless person. And he's like a seed which is blown by the wind towards the sky and back to the earth, a completely destitute man. And yet Allah does not overlook and ignore him. Allah knows his hidden qualities, and he brought that same Luqman to a prominent position in the world so that he became a teacher of righteousness. And then his preaching was forever preserved in the Holy Quran. And this is why this verse ends. Surely Allah is knower of subtleties, aware, Latifun Khabir. That Allah knew what was inside him. He knows these tiny, small things, which then go on to have a great effect, which can rise to greatness. And the concept of God presented in the Holy Quran is not simply of a being, as we normally think, who has great power and strength and who can use force to do anything. But the concept of God in the Quran is not only that, but also of a being who works in subtle and delicate ways. Sometimes, you've heard about using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. That's using brute force. But there are subtle ways, obviously, of cracking the nut as well. And Allah is also subtle. Now, before going further, I may make another point which Mr. Faruqi made. In the verse which I just read, it begins in English, "Oh my son, Ya Bunayya." And an earlier verse, which I covered last week, also begins, Luqman said to his son, Ya Bunayya, my son, don't set up any partner with Allah. And the verse I'll be coming to after this 16, it also begins with Ya Bunayya, oh my son. And Mr. Faruqi has pointed out something which wouldn't have occurred to me, that this is an affectionate form of address to the son. Ya Bunayya, oh my son. And this form, says Mr. Faruqi, is more likely to be acceptable to children and is more effective than the way in which most parents speak to their children about moral and spiritual teachings. He says they command them and order them, and then when those things don't work, they lose their patience and temper with children. So it says this, Luqman saying to his son, addressing it, Ya Bunayya. He's teaching his son with great love and affection. And I should also add here that not only does he instruct his son in a gentle, loving way, but when Luqman was teaching his son to be thankful to his parents and to do good to parents, he was not doing it out of his own self-interest. Luqman is the father. He doesn't say to his son, thank me because I did this and this for you. Instead, what he mentions to his son is the suffering and hardship that his mother underwent to bear him and to bring him up. Luqman doesn't say, I worked from 8 o'clock and I worked for 12 hours a day, 7 days a week to give you the things that you need. He mentioned the mother. And also, we noticed last week that Luqman did not teach his son blind obedience to parents. He told his son that what God says is this, and if your parents try to make you set up partners with me, then do not obey them, but still keep kindly company with them in this world and follow the way of him who turns to me. This is what Luqman told his son, that Allah says, and follow the way of him who turns to me. Then to me is your return. That is to say, what he's teaching is, if the parents try to make you worship and follow someone other than God in the way in which you should be worshiping God, then don't obey them. But the principle he is teaching his son, which comes from God, is follow the way of him who turns to me. He says, in that respect, don't obey your parents. They're telling you to go on the wrong path, but follow the way of him who turns to me. So he's setting there the principle. As a parent, he himself needs to be one who turns to God if he is going to be entitled to ask his son to obey him. So if his son is going to obey him, it will be because Luqman is himself turning to Allah, because he's saying to his son, follow the way of him who turns to Allah. And the next verse, verse 17 in this connection, is as follows. And I'll only read it out in translation for a shortage of time. Luqman says, my son, keep up prayer and enjoin good and forbid evil. Enjoin just means telling people that it's important. Enjoin good and forbid evil, and bear patiently whatever befalls you. This is a matter of great resolution. Verse 17 of chapter 31. Now, if we believe God to be one and believe that no one and nothing should be made a partner with him, as Luqman said, then our first duty is to pray to God. Because otherwise, we are taking God to be like all those other things which we are saying we shouldn't be praying to. So if we believe in God and don't pray to him, but we believe in God and we believe that other things aren't God, then we are treating God equally with those other things. And prayer is the means of seeking help from God to enable us to follow his teachings. And the next thing mentioned by Luqman is this in the verse whose translation I read above: enjoin good and forbid evil. That means inform people about what is right and what is wrong. And by doing this, the person who enjoins good and forbids evil, he wishes to raise other people to the same level that he himself has risen to and achieved. He wants to bring them to his level. He's not looking down on them. And also you note that Luqman is telling his son to do what Luqman is doing. Luqman is teaching goodness to his son and telling him what is wrong and what is right and what is wrong. And he's asking his son to continue that work towards other people. And finally, this next piece of advice: and bear patiently whatever befalls you. And this has a general meaning that everyone knows, that whoever we are, whatever our religion, Muslim or non-Muslim, believers in God, non-believers in God, there are many things which happen to us in this world over which we have no control and we are helpless in the face of them. This is where we have to exercise patience and persevere in the difficulties we find ourselves in. That's the general meaning. And the specific meaning of this advice in this context, after saying enjoin good, forbid evil, and then be patient, that again has been referred to by Mr. Faruqi in his article, that he says when you enjoin and forbid evil, which is the work of the propagation of Islam, you will face opposition from people who don't like you. You'll face, or they don't like the movement that you belong to. You even face persecution. People ridicule you, they belittle your work. Your well-meaning, sincere friends tell you not to waste your time. And your own efforts seem to be bearing very little fruit. So in that situation, while doing this work of the propagation of Islam, you have to show patience. And as stated here, this is a matter of great resolution. It shown the command to show patience on whatever befalls you is followed by these words, Inna zalika min azmil umur. Surely this is a matter of great resolution. So, although I've written a little more in this khutbah, I'll end it here. بارك الله لنا ولكم في القرآن العظيم ونفعنا وإياكم بالآيات والذكر الحكيم إنه تعالى جواد كريم ولكم بر رؤوف رحيم. الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. And we may say a few short prayers that ربنا اغفر لنا ذنوبنا. Our Lord, forgive us our faults. وإسرافنا في أمرنا. And our going out of bounds in conducting our affairs. وَثَبِّتْ أَقْدَامَنَا. And make our footsteps firm. وَانْصُرْنَا عَلَى الْقَوْمِ الْكَافِرِينَ. And make us victorious over all kinds of forces of disbelief, whether they are within us or they come from outside. رَبَّنَا لَا تُزِغْ قُلُوبَنَا بَعْدَ إِذْ هَدَيْتَنَا وَهَبْ لَنَا مِن لَّدُنكَ رَحْمَةً إِنَّكَ أَنتَ الْوَهَّابُ. Our Lord, do not make us deviate, do not make our hearts deviate after you have guided us. And grant us your mercy from yourself. You are the great granter of mercy. Ameen. And the prayer for people's health. Azhibil basa rabbin nas. Take away people's illnesses, O Lord of all mankind. Azhibil basa rabbin nas. Washfi anta shafi. Heal and you are the healer. La shafi illa anta. There is no healer except you. La shifa illa shifauka. There is no healing except your healing. Shifan la yuhadiru sakama. Healing which leaves not a trace of illness. And before I conclude this second khutbah, after the 2 rakat farz prayers, we will say the janaza prayer for Mr. Abdul Santu of Holland, Rotterdam, and previously of Suriname, who died a couple of days ago and who served our movement very greatly over many decades and was well known in many of our Jamaats in various countries of the world. And he had been the Central Anjuman's representative in Europe. So he had overall supervision of missions in Holland, our own in the UK, and the Berlin mission for many years. So, Allahumma aghfir lahu, O Allah, grant him your forgiveness. Warhamhu, have mercy on him. Wadkhilhu fi ibadikas salihin, grant him to join your most righteous servants. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. عباد اللہ اذکروا اللہ یذکرکم ودعوہ یستجب لکم ولذکر اللہ تعالی اکبر واللہ یعلم ما تصنعون. And the 2 rakah Juma first prayers.
اللہ اکبر اشہد ان لا الہ الا اللہ اشہد ان محمد رسول اللہ حی علی الصلاۃ حی علی الفلاح قد قامت الصلاۃ قد قامت الصلاۃ اللہ اکبر لا الہ الا اللہ.
I will recite only short surahs. Allahu Akbar. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. Malik Yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Ihdina as-siratal mustaqim. Siratal ladzina an'amta alayhim. غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. إذا جاء نصر الله والفتح ورأيت الناس يدخلون في دين الله أفواجا فسبح بحمد ربك واستغفره إنه كان توابا. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده حمدا كثيرا طيبا. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. التحيات. السلام عليكم. أشهد اللهم صل على محمد. ربی جل نہیں ہوگی رکھ لئے. السلام علیکم ورحمۃ اللہ. السلام علیکم ورحمۃ اللہ. اللہم انت السلام ومنک السلام تبارک ربنا وتعالی یا ذا الجلال والاکرام. استغفر اللہ ربی من کل ذنب واتوب الیہ. رب اغفر وارحم وانت خیر الراحمین. یا حی یا قیوم برحمتک استغیث برحمتک یا رب العالمین. We will now say the Janaza prayers for Mr. Abdus Santo. And as you know, it's said in the standing position, and there are 4 takbeers. And after the first takbeer, you begin the prayer as normal till the end of Surah Fatiha. After the second one, you recite the Durood, and after the third one, the prayer for the forgiveness of the deceased, which could be the Masnoon prayer or a prayer in your own words. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Allahumma aghfir لنبينا وميتنا. Allahu Akbar. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. That then is the end of this broadcast. You will be aware that on Tuesday, the 21st of December, there is the funeral of our departed brother Zaman Shah, and details of the venues have been sent out. And you will also know from the information which was sent out that Mr. Walter Aziz Ali is now in palliative care in hospital, and one or two pray for his soul and for his family. That is all then, and we'll now say our Sunnah prayers to complete the Friday service. Thank you very much for joining us. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.